The first thing I noticed was not the 8-foot-tall Bigfoot standing in my hangar. It was the smell. Old forest, wet earth, something wild that had no business being inside a building that smelled like aviation fuel and motor oil. That smell hit me before I even turned on the lights, before I saw what was examining my cargo door, before I understood that something had been waiting for me to arrive. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 38 years old. I fly freight runs between Fairbanks and remote villages across interior Alaska. Building supplies, mail, frozen food, emergency medical deliveries. The kind of flying where you work when others sleep because weather windows do not wait for daylight and village stores do not close for blizzards. I have been doing this for 11 years. And in those 11 years, I have made exactly one mistake that changed everything. I left my hangar unlocked. My hangar sits for miles outside Fairbanks, on a private airstrip I lease from a guy who does not ask questions about my schedule or my cargo. The building is old, corrugated metal walls, concrete floor stained with decades of oil and hydraulic fluid, one overhead door for the plane, one side door for people. Both doors have locks. Both doors are supposed to stay locked when I am not there. On March 3, 2025, I had a 4 a.m. departure scheduled for Fort Yukon, load of building supplies and frozen food. Standard run. I had flown back to Fairbanks the previous night at 11 p.m. after a 14-hour day delivering medical supplies to 3 different villages. I was exhausted. I parked my Cessna Caravan, did my post-flight checks, grabbed my flight bag, and walked out. And I forgot to check the side door latch. Simple human mistake. The kind of thing that happens when you are tired and your brain is running on fumes. I thought I had locked it. I have locked that door 1,000 times. Muscle memory, routine. Except that night, the latch did not fully engage and the door stayed unlocked. I arrived back at the hangar to pre-flight and load cargo. The temperature outside was minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Clear sky, no wind, perfect flying weather for Alaska winter. I punched in my security code at the side door. I pushed it open. And that smell stopped me cold. Not decay, not garbage, not the normal hangar smells of fuel and grease and old coffee. This was different, organic, ancient, like standing in a forest that had never seen a chainsaw or a trail marker. Wet bark, moss, pine needles decomposing under snow. And underneath all of that, something musky, animal, alive. I stood in the doorway for maybe 10 seconds, trying to rationalize what I was smelling. The Bigfoot got in somehow. The smell was too strong, too present, too wrong for this place. I flipped the light switches. Overhead fluorescence buzzed to life. And there it was, standing beside the cargo door of my Cessna Caravan, dark brown fur covering its entire body. Shoulders broader than any human I had ever seen, maybe 4 feet across. Arms that hung past where knees should be on a person, and a head that turned toward me when the lights came on. The face was not human. Heavy brow ridge, broad flat nose. But the eyes were intelligent, aware. Not the blank stare of an animal caught in headlights. This was recognition. This was a thinking being that had been examining my plane and now had to decide what to do about the fact that I had arrived. We looked at each other for 43 seconds. I know the exact time because I checked my security camera footage later. 43 seconds where neither of us moved. Where I stood frozen in the doorway and this thing stood frozen beside my aircraft. Where my brain cycled through every possible explanation and rejected all of them because none of them made sense. Then the Bigfoot moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just calm, deliberate. It turned its body toward the open door behind me, and it walked, upright, bipedal. Each step placing a foot carefully on the concrete floor. Heel to toe, like a human walks, but with a stride length that had to be 5 feet between steps. It walked past me, close enough that I could feel heat radiating off its body. Close enough that the smell intensified into something almost overwhelming. Close enough that I could hear its breathing. Slow, deep, controlled. Then it was outside. Gone into the darkness, beyond the reach of my exterior lights. Disappeared like it had never been there. Except it had been there. The smell lingered. The warmth where it had stood beside my plane was still present in the cold hangar air, and on my pilot's seat, carefully placed where I would find it, was something it had left behind, a piece of birch bark, and drawn on that bark in what looked like charcoal was a map. Not a professional map. No scale, no compass rose, no labels, just simple lines representing terrain, rivers, mountain ridges, valleys, and marked on that map in 14 different locations was small circles, deliberate, precise, intentional. I stood there holding that birch bark map under the harsh fluorescent lights of my hangar, trying to understand what I was looking at. The level of detail was remarkable. Whoever had drawn this knew the terrain intimately, knew where creeks converged, knew where ridgelines ran, knew the shape of valleys I recognized from flying over them twice a week, and those 14 circles were not random. They were placed with purpose. Each one marked a specific location in the White Mountains wilderness, each one positioned in terrain that was remote even by Alaska standards, terrain where you could walk for 60 miles and never cross a road or see another human. I pulled out my phone and opened my saved files. Alaska State Trooper, missing person reports. I had been collecting them for years. Part of my job involved keeping an eye out for lost hikers and hunters during my flights. Part of being a responsible pilot in the bush. I cross-referenced the coordinates I estimated from the map with the last known positions of missing people. Started with the most recent disappearances. Worked backward through the past 8 months. The first match made my hands go cold. Sarah Chen, 31 years old, wildlife researcher from University of Alaska Fairbanks, disappeared during fieldwork in the White Mountains on July 15, 2024. Last known position matched one of the circles on the map within a 2-mile radius. Second match, David Krakowski, 47 years old, hunter from Anchorage, disappeared October 3, 2024. Last known position matched another circle. Third match, Emily Santos, 26 years old, grad student, disappeared August 22, 2024. I went through all 14 circles. Every single one matched a missing person report. 14 people who had disappeared in the White Mountains over the past 8 months. 14 people who had been declared dead or presumed dead by Alaska State Troopers. 14 people whose families had held memorials and filed death certificates and tried to move on. And something that should not exist had just walked into my hangar and given me a map showing where they were. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my workbench, staring at that birch bark map and trying to decide what it meant. Was the Bigfoot telling me these people were alive? Was it asking for help? Was it showing me where bodies were hidden? I pulled up satellite imagery of each location. Dense forest, steep terrain, no roads, no trails, no structures visible from space, just wilderness that swallowed people and kept them. For 4 days I studied that map, canceled flights, made excuses, could not stop thinking about those 14 circles and the families who thought their loved ones were dead. Could not stop smelling that old forest smell that had filled my hangar. Could not stop seeing those intelligent eyes watching me decide what to do. On the 4th night, I arrived at my hangar at 2:17 a.m., and I was not alone anymore. The Bigfoot had returned, standing in the same spot, beside my plane, but this time it was not examining the cargo door. This time it was holding something, and when the lights came on, it did not walk away. It walked toward me, stopped 15 feet away, and set the object on the floor between us. A GPS device, Garmin InReach Explorer, battered cracked screen, dried blood on the casing, and carved into the back panel with something sharp was a name. Sarah Chen, the wildlife researcher, missing for 8 months, declared dead 6 months ago. The creature looked at me, pointed north with one massive arm, then pointed at my plane, then looked at me again with eyes that carried a question I could not ignore. It was asking me to fly. Sarah Chen, SGP, sat on my workbench for 3 days before I could bring myself to touch it again. The blood on the casing had dried to a dark brown, old, months old. But whose blood it was remained a question that kept me awake every night, staring at my ceiling and running through possibilities I did not want to consider. I pulled Alaska State Trooper case files on Sarah Chen, wildlife researcher, University of Alaska Fairbanks, age 31. Disappeared July 15, 2024, while conducting field research on caribou migration patterns in the White Mountains, reporting normal conditions and planned return to base camp. She never arrived. Search and rescue operations ran for 6 days. Helicopters, ground teams, search dogs. They found her base camp intact. Tent properly secured. Food supplies untouched. Research notes organized. No signs of struggle. No signs of wildlife attack. No signs of Sarah Chen. On day 7, Alaska State Troopers scaled back the search. On day 14, they suspended operations. Weather had moved in. Snow covered any remaining tracks. The terrain was too dangerous for ground teams to continue. Sarah Chen was declared missing, presumed dead. Her family held a memorial service in September. Her position at the university was filled in October. And now her GPS device sat on my workbench with blood on it and a question I could not answer. How did Bigfoot get this? Where did Bigfoot get this? And most importantly, was Sarah Chen alive when Bigfoot took it from her? I ran every scenario. Bigfoot found her body and took the GPS as a curiosity. Bigfoot attacked her and kept the device as a trophy. Bigfoot rescued her and the blood came from injuries sustained before the rescue. Each scenario felt wrong in different ways. None of them explained why Bigfoot would bring the GPS to me. None of them explained the map with 14 locations. None of them explained why Bigfoot kept returning to my hangar like it was trying to communicate something urgent. The 4th night, after receiving the GPS, I made a decision that went against every rational instinct I had developed in 11 years of flying in Alaska. I decided to trust Bigfoot. Wanted to understand what this being wanted from me. I parked my truck 100 yards from the hangar. Killed the engine, killed the lights. Sat in darkness, watching the building through light snow that had started falling around midnight. Temperature was minus 38 degrees. Wind calm. Visibility maybe a quarter mile. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, I saw movement near the side door. A shape too large to be human. Too upright to be a bear. Moving with purpose toward the entrance. Bigfoot stopped at the door. Looked both ways like it was checking to see if anyone was watching. Then pushed the door open and disappeared inside. I waited 2 minutes. Then I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the hangar. My boots crunched on frozen snow, each step sounding impossibly loud in a still night air. I reached the door, took a breath, pushed it open. Bigfoot stood beside my Cessna Caravan. Same position as before. But this time Bigfoot was not examining the cargo door. This time Bigfoot was looking directly at me like it had been waiting. Like it had heard my truck arrive and had timed its entrance knowing I would follow. We stood 30 feet apart. I could see details I had missed during the first encounter. The fur was not uniformly dark brown. Lighter patches around the face and chest. Gray streaks along the shoulders suggesting age. Maybe 60 years old. Maybe 80. Impossible to know. The eyes caught the reflection of my flashlight. Not like animal eyes that glow with tapetum, lucidum. These eyes reflected light the way human eyes do. Dark, intelligent, measuring. Bigfoot made a sound. Low, resonant, not a growl, not aggressive. Almost like a whale song compressed into a shorter frequency. The sound vibrated in my chest. Made the metal walls of the hangar hum slightly. A communication attempt. A greeting maybe. Or a question. I did not know how to respond. Did not know if responding was even the right move. So I just stood there holding my flashlight and trying to appear non-threatening to an 8-foot-tall being that could probably break me in half without effort. Bigfoot pointed north. Same gesture as before. Deliberate. Unmistakable. Then Bigfoot pointed at my plane. Then back at me. The meaning was clear, even without words. Bigfoot wanted me to fly north. Wanted me to use my plane to go somewhere. Wanted me to see something, or retrieve something, or understand something that could only be explained by going there. I pulled the birch bark map from my jacket pocket, unfolded it, held it up so Bigfoot could see. I pointed at the 14 circles marked on the terrain. Then I pointed at Bigfoot. Then made a questioning gesture with my hands. Are these people alive? Are you asking me to find them? Are you asking me to help? Bigfoot stepped closer. 3 long strides that closed the distance between us two, maybe 15 feet. Close enough that I could smell that old forest scent again. Wet bark, moss, something wild that had lived in wilderness for decades and carried that wilderness on its skin and in its fur. Bigfoot reached out one massive hand, not toward me, toward the map. I held it steady, despite the trembling in my arms. Bigfoot's finger, thick as a broom handle, touched one specific circle on the map, the location that matched Sarah Chen's last known position. Then Bigfoot made another sound, softer, almost gentle, and nodded. That nod was learned behavior. Bigfoot had watched humans long enough to understand that nodding meant yes, meant affirmation, meant this is true and I am confirming it for you. Sarah Chen was alive, or had been alive when Bigfoot last saw her. That GPS with blood on it came from a living person, not a corpse. And Bigfoot was asking me to fly to that location and see for myself. But the nod also meant something else. It meant the other 13 circles on the map likely represented living people too. 13 other missing persons who had been declared dead. 13 other families who had buried empty caskets and moved on with their grief. 13 other lives that could potentially be saved if I made the choice to trust what Bigfoot was telling me. I have a brother, had a brother. His name was David. He was 16 years old when he disappeared during a solo hiking trip in Denali National Park in August 2010. I was 23, working as a flight instructor in Anchorage, planning to build enough hours to fly commercially. Living a normal life where the biggest risk was bad weather and student pilots who froze on the controls. David went into Denali for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was experienced, had done dozens of solo trips, knew wilderness, survival, carried proper gear, filed a trip plan with park rangers, did everything right. He never came back. Search and rescue ran for 6 days. I flew support missions, spent hours at low altitude, scanning terrain for any sign of my brother, any color that did not belong in that landscape, any movement that might be a person signaling for help. We found nothing. No tent, no pack, no body, just wilderness that had swallowed a 16-year-old kid and left no trace. On day 7, the Park Service scaled back operations. On day 14, they suspended the search. David Webb was declared missing, presumed dead. My parents held a memorial. I stopped flying for 6 months because every time I got in a cockpit, I saw that terrain and knew my brother was down there somewhere and I had not been able to find him. That failure shaped everything I did afterward. I moved to interior Alaska, specifically to fly freight to remote villages. Told myself it was about the money and the adventure. But really, it was about the chance that maybe someday I would spot something. Some sign of a missing person. Some opportunity to bring someone home when I had failed to bring David home. And now Bigfoot was giving me that chance. 14 people. 14 families. 14 opportunities to succeed where I had failed 15 years ago. But trusting Bigfoot meant ignoring every protocol. Meant flying into wilderness without filing accurate flight plans. Meant potentially putting myself in danger based on information from a being that should not exist. Meant risking my pilot's license and my livelihood on the hope that Bigfoot was telling the truth. I looked at the map, looked at Sarah Chen's GPS, looked at Bigfoot standing patiently beside my plane, waiting for my decision. I made my choice. I walked to my workbench and pulled out sectional charts, spread them across the metal surface, found the coordinates that matched the first circle on Bigfoot's map, measured the distance from Fairbanks, 127 nautical miles northeast. White Mountains wilderness. No airstrips, no roads. Just terrain too rough for four-wheeled landings and too dangerous for emergency situations. I would need to land on a frozen lake or river bar. Would need perfect weather. Would need fuel calculations that left no margin for error. Would need to file a flight plan that listed false coordinates so no one would know where I actually went. I looked at Bigfoot, nodded once. Yes, I will do this. I will fly to these coordinates. I will see what you want me to see. Bigfoot made that low resonant sound again, but this time it sounded different. Relieved maybe. Grateful. Bigfoot turned and walked toward the door, stopped at the threshold, looked back once with those intelligent eyes, then disappeared into the darkness and falling snow. I spent the next 2 hours calculating fuel loads and filing a false flight plan. Official destination, Fort Yukon. Routine cargo delivery. Actual destination, White Mountains Wilderness. Coordinates matching Sarah Chen's last known position. The risk was enormous. If anyone discovered the deception, I would lose my license. If I crashed in that terrain, no one would know where to search. If Bigfoot was wrong or lying, I would waste a day and expensive fuel on a fool's errand. But if Bigfoot was right, I might bring home 14 people that everyone else had given up for dead. Might give 14 families the closure I never got with David. Might prove that sometimes the impossible was just the truth that no one had been brave enough to believe. I filed the flight plan, pre-flighted my Cessna, loaded minimal cargo to save weight for potential passengers on the return flight, calculated every fuel scenario, checked weather 3 times, climbing northeast toward coordinates that would either validate everything Bigfoot had shown me or prove I was flying toward nothing based on trust given to a being I had met 4 days ago. 44 minutes into the flight, my radar showed something that made my hands tighten on the controls. A terrain return that did not match my charts. A mass reading that suggested structures where no structures should exist. Something built, something hidden, something waiting in wilderness that had supposedly swallowed 14 people without trace. I descended through 8,000 feet and saw what Bigfoot had been trying to show me. And what I saw made everything I thought I knew about missing persons in Alaska completely wrong. They were alive, all of them, standing in front of cave openings, carved into a granite cliff face that should not have had caves, should not have had smoke rising from ventilation holes. Should not have had human voices echoing across a frozen lake where no humans were supposed to exist. I circled the lake twice before committing to the landing. The ice looked solid, thick enough to support the weight of my Cessna. But I had learned in 11 years of bush flying that ice could be deceptive, could look perfect from altitude and be rotten underneath, could hold for 10 seconds and then collapse under you before you had time to realize your mistake. The landing was rough. The skis I had installed 2 days earlier bit into wind-packed snow and jerked the plane sideways. I corrected, straightened, let the Cessna slow naturally until it came to rest maybe 200 yards from the cliff face, close enough to see details, far enough to run if this turned out to be something other than what Bigfoot had promised. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. No wind, no aircraft noise. Just a tick of cooling metal and the hammer of my pulse in my ears. Through the windscreen, I could see figures emerging from the caves. Human figures, moving slowly, cautiously, like people who had learned not to trust unexpected arrivals. I counted 9 people, adults, various ages, dressed in layers of animal hide and salvaged fabric. Not the hypothermia victims I had expected to find. Not the desperate survivors clinging to life. These people looked healthy, adapted, like they had been living in this place long enough to make it work. And standing among them, taller than any human, were 3 Bigfoot. The largest stood in the center. Same dark brown fur, with gray streaks I had seen in my hangar. The one I had been calling Bigfoot in my mind, but who clearly had companions. 2 others flanked the group, slightly smaller, one with reddish-brown fur. One with fur so dark it looked almost black in the morning light. A family maybe, or a group, a community of beings that lived alongside these missing humans in a place the world had declared empty. I sat in the cockpit for 5 full minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to reconcile the official reports that said these people were dead with the evidence of my own eyes that said they were very much alive. Trying to decide if opening the door and stepping out was the right choice or the last choice I would ever make. A woman separated from the group, started walking toward my plane. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair pulled back, face weathered by sun and wind. She moved with confidence across the ice. No hesitation, no fear, just purpose. I recognized her face from the missing person report. Sarah Chen, wildlife researcher. 8 months missing, declared dead 6 months ago, walking toward my plane like she had been expecting me. I opened the door, Cold air hit like a physical force. -40 at least, maybe colder. The kind of temperature that burns your lungs if you breathe too deeply. I climbed down from the cockpit, stood beside my plane, waited for Sarah Chen to close the distance between us. She stopped 10 feet away, studied me with eyes that had seen things I could not imagine, eyes that carried knowledge and wariness in equal measure. Then she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse, the voice of someone who had spent months speaking rarely and softly. She said her name, said she knew who I was because Bigfoot had told her a pilot was coming, said she needed me to understand something before I made any decisions about what I had found here, said the wrong choice would get people killed and she needed me to know that before I chose. I told her I was listening, told her Bigfoot had given me her GPS and a map showing locations, told her I had come to see if the map was real or if I had wasted fuel and risked my license on something impossible. Sarah looked back at the caves, at the people watching us, at the 3 Bigfoots standing patient and still. Then she started talking, and what she told me rewrote everything I thought I knew about wilderness disappearances in Alaska. She had been conducting caribou migration research in mid-July. Solo work, standard protocol for experienced field researchers. She had been tracking a herd through dense forest when she heard voices. Human voices, arguing. She had approached thinking maybe other researchers were in the area. Thinking maybe she could coordinate data collection. Instead she found 4 men in camouflage standing over a freshly killed grizzly bear. Not hunters, poachers, illegal harvest in protected wilderness. But that was not what made Sarah's blood run cold. What made her freeze behind a spruce tree was the conversation she overheard. The men were not just poaching bears. They were running a trafficking operation. Grizzly gallbladders, wolf pelts, wolverine specimens, items worth thousands on black markets in Asia. One of the men saw her, shouted. Sarah ran. She was young, fit, knew the terrain from months of research, but for men with rifles and radios could cover ground faster than one woman with a day pack. They chased her for 3 hours. She lost them twice. They found her trail both times. By evening she was exhausted, dehydrated, lost. She had abandoned her GPS, trying to lighten her pack, had thrown away everything except water and a jacket. The men were close. She could hear them calling to each other, coordinating, herding her toward a box canyon where she would have nowhere to run. That was when Bigfoot found her, not the one from my hangar, a different one, the female with reddish-brown fur. Sarah had collapsed against a boulder, trying to catch her breath, trying to figure out which direction offered any chance of escape. The female Bigfoot had simply appeared. No sound, no warning, just there, standing 15 feet away watching Sarah with the same intelligent eyes I had seen in my hangar. Sarah had been too exhausted to be frightened, too desperate to care if this being was dangerous. She had just sat there gasping while Bigfoot studied her, while the voices of the poachers grew closer, while her options narrowed to captured or dead. Bigfoot had made a decision, reached down, picked Sarah up like she weighed nothing, and ran. Not the shambling gait people imagine. Real running, covering ground with strides that ate up distance faster than any human could match. Sarah had clung to fur and tried not to fall while the forest blurred past and the voices of the poachers faded behind them. Bigfoot had brought her here, to this sanctuary, 2 caves that had been modified over decades into livable spaces, to a community of rescued humans who had all witnessed something that made them targets, who had all been hunted by people willing to kill to protect illegal operations, who had all been saved by Bigfoot and given a choice: stay hidden and stay alive, or return to civilization and risk assassination. Sarah had chosen to stay, so had 8 others. Not because they wanted to abandon their families, not because they preferred wilderness to comfort, but because the poaching ring had connections, had reached into law enforcement, had demonstrated capability to eliminate witnesses even after they were found. 2 of the people in this sanctuary had tried to return, had been escorted by Bigfoot to within a mile of civilization, had contacted authorities, had given statements about what they had witnessed. Both had died within a week. One in a car accident that investigators ruled mechanical failure. One from a fall downstairs that witnesses called tragic but unsuspicious. Both deaths convenient. Both deaths final. The remaining survivors had gotten the message: stay hidden or die. Trust Bigfoot or trust a system that had already failed to protect witnesses twice. The choice was clear, even if the situation was impossible. I listened to Sarah's story and felt my understanding of the world shift. These were not lost hikers, not accident victims, not people who had made mistakes in the wilderness. These were witnesses to organized crime who had been hunted like animals and saved by beings that should not exist but did. And Bigfoot had brought me here, had shown me the GPS, had drawn me the map, had trusted me with this secret. Why? What did Bigfoot want from me that required bringing a pilot into this sanctuary? Sarah answered before I could ask. She said families were suffering, parents who thought their children were dead, spouses who had buried empty caskets, people who deserved to know their loved ones were alive even if they could not come home. She said Bigfoot understood grief, had lost family to violence, had watched humans kill what they did not understand. But Bigfoot also understood hope. Understood that families needed truth, even if truth came without reunion. Bigfoot wanted me to be a bridge, to carry messages between the sanctuary and the outside world, to tell families their people were alive without revealing where, to give hope without giving location, to be the connection that let these survivors maintain contact with the lives they had left behind while staying hidden from the people who wanted them dead. But there was more. Sarah's eyes went hard when she explained the rest. 3 of the people in the sanctuary wanted to return despite the risks. Wanted to testify against the poaching ring, even if it meant becoming targets. Wanted to stop the organization from creating more victims. They had evidence, photographs, locations, names, everything needed to build a federal case. But they needed protection that Alaska law enforcement had already proven unable or unwilling to provide. Sarah asked if I could do it. If I could coordinate with federal agencies outside Alaska. If I could arrange witness protection that would actually protect. If I could be the person who brought down an operation that had been killing wildlife and witnesses for at least a decade. I looked past Sarah at the caves, at the people watching our conversation, at the 3 Bigfoot standing patient and protective, at a community that had formed in absolute secrecy because the alternative was death. At survivors who had adapted to impossible circumstances because humans had failed them and Bigfoot had not. I thought about David, about my brother who had disappeared in wilderness and never came home, about the failure I had carried for 15 years, about the second chance Bigfoot was offering me to succeed where I had failed before, about the risk of getting involved in something far bigger and more dangerous than flying cargo to villages. And I thought about the poaching ring that was still operating, still killing, still creating situations where people had to choose between hiding with Bigfoot or dying at human hands, still functioning because no one had been brave enough or protected enough to testify. I told Sarah yes, told her I would do it, told her I would be the bridge and the coordinator and whatever else was needed, told her I would risk my license and my safety and my life if necessary because no one should have to choose between Bigfoot sanctuary and assassination. Sarah nodded. Relief washed across her face. Then she looked past me at my plane, asked how much fuel I had left, asked how much weight I could carry, asked if I could take 3 people back to Fairbanks today if they were willing to risk everything on federal protection that might or might not work. I did the calculations in my head. Fuel was tight but manageable. Weight depended on how much gear the passengers brought. Timing meant flying back in daylight, which increased visibility but also increased the chance of being tracked. Risk was enormous. Success was uncertain. Failure meant deaths I would carry the rest of my life. I looked at the 3 Bigfoot, at beings that had saved 9 humans and protected them for months. At intelligence that had drawn maps and carried GPS devices and trusted a random pilot with the biggest secret in Alaska. At a community that worked because Bigfoot had chosen mercy over violence even after humans had given them every reason to choose differently. I told Sarah to get them ready. Told her we were leaving in 30 minutes. Told her to bring whatever evidence they had and prepare for whatever came next because once we started this, there would be no going back. Sarah turned and ran toward the caves, started shouting to the others. 3 people separated from the group, started gathering belongings, started preparing to leave the only safety they had known in months on the promise that this time protection would actually protect. The largest Bigfoot walked toward me, stopped 20 feet from my plane, made that low resonant sound I had heard in my hangar. I pulled the carved antler from my pocket, held it up so Bigfoot could see I had kept it, that I had honored the trust given. Bigfoot nodded, then pointed northeast, then made a gesture with both hands that I did not understand. A warning maybe, or a promise, or information about something I had not asked about yet. I was about to signal that I did not understand when I heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountains to the northeast, coming closer, coming fast, coming from the direction where no helicopters should be, because no one knew this sanctuary existed, except someone did know. Someone had followed me. Someone had tracked my flight path. Someone had waited for me to lead them exactly where they wanted to go. And now that someone was coming with the kind of resources that meant this was not a rescue operation, Bigfoot's gesture suddenly made sense. It was not a warning about the future. It was a warning about right now. The poachers had found us, and we had maybe 10 minutes before they arrived. The helicopter sound grew from a distant hum to a mechanical roar in less than 90 seconds. Fast, too fast for casual patrol, too direct for a coincidental flight path. Someone had tracked my course. Someone had waited for me to land. Someone had timed their approach to arrive exactly when I would be most vulnerable with passengers. Boarding and fuel calculations already tight. Sarah sprinted across the ice toward my plane with 3 people following. 2 men, 1 woman, all carrying small packs, all moving with the urgency of people who understood that hesitation meant capture or death. Behind them, the remaining sanctuary survivors scattered toward the caves, disappearing into openings that would be invisible from aerial view, taking shelter in stone that had protected them for months. The 3 Bigfoot did not run, did not hide. The largest one I had been meeting in my hangar positioned itself between the caves and the lake. The female with reddish fur moved to higher ground on the cliff face. The dark-furred one circled wide toward the forest edge. Strategic positioning, defensive perimeter. They were preparing to protect the sanctuary, even if it meant revealing themselves to whoever was coming. I yanked open the cargo door, started physically pulling people into the plane. No time for weight calculations, no time for proper seating, no time for anything except getting bodies inside and getting airborne. Before that helicopter cleared the ridgeline and had visual on my position, Sarah climbed into the co-pilot seat. The 3 witnesses crammed into the cargo area among supply boxes and emergency gear. I was already starting the engine before the last person had pulled the door closed. The Cessna's propeller bit air. The skis scraped across wind-hardened snow. I released brakes and committed to a takeoff run that was too short and too risky, and the only chance we had. The plane accelerated. Skis hammering over rough patches. Airspeed building slower than I wanted. I could see the helicopter now. Black, unmarked. The kind of aircraft that meant private money and purposes that avoided official scrutiny. It crested the ridge to the northeast and dropped into the valley, heading directly toward the lake, directly toward the sanctuary, directly toward us. My Cessna lifted off with maybe 50 yards of ice remaining. Marginal, dangerous. The kind of takeoff that flight instructors use as examples of what not to do. But we were airborne, climbing, banking hard west to put terrain between us and whoever was in that helicopter. Through my side window, I caught a glimpse of what happened next. The helicopter settled into hover over the lake. Right where my plane had been parked 90 seconds earlier, a door slid open. 2 figures in tactical gear appeared in the opening. One pointed toward my departing aircraft. The other pointed toward the caves, where the Bigfoot still stood guard. Then the largest Bigfoot did something I did not expect. It walked onto the ice, into full view, making itself completely visible to the helicopter occupants, drawing attention, creating distraction, buying time for the cave dwellers to disappear deeper into the sanctuary, where aerial observation could not reach. The helicopter rotated to track Bigfoot's movement. I saw muzzle flash from the open door. Heard the distant crack of rifle fire echoing across the valley. Bigfoot dove behind a snow berm. The female on the cliff face picked up a rock the size of a refrigerator and hurled it down toward the helicopter. The throw had power that defied biology. The rock fell short, but close enough that the pilot jerked away in evasive maneuver. I banked harder west, dropped into a canyon that would mask us from direct line of sight. My altimeter unwound as I descended below the ridgeline, flying terrain that required total focus. Rock walls on both sides, frozen creek bed below. Margin for error measured in feet, not miles. Sarah's voice cut through the engine noise, telling me the helicopter would follow. Telling me the poaching ring had resources that included experienced pilots and aircraft equipped for pursuit. Telling me running west would only delay the inevitable because they would track us to Fairbanks and be waiting when we landed. One of the men in the cargo area spoke up. His voice shook with adrenaline and fear mixed together. He said his name was Thomas Whitebear. Said he had been living in the sanctuary for 9 months. Said he knew the poaching operation better than anyone because he used to work for them before his conscience made him a liability. Thomas explained details while I flew the canyon at speeds that left no room for mistakes. The operation was bigger than wildlife trafficking. It was a network that moved illegal goods across Alaska, using wilderness routes that avoided official oversight. Grizzly parts, walrus ivory, protected bird specimens. Everything sold to international buyers who paid premium prices for items that existed outside legal markets. But the real money was in protection. The poaching ring had corrupted officials at multiple levels. State troopers who looked the other way, federal agents who buried evidence, judges who dismissed cases. Anyone who threatened the network became a target. Anyone who witnessed operations became a problem that required permanent solutions. Thomas had witnessed a killing. Not an animal, a human, a park ranger who had stumbled onto a poaching camp and asked too many questions. Thomas had watched 2 men drag the ranger into the forest, watched them return alone, watched them laugh about making it look like a bear attack. That was when Thomas understood the stakes. That was when he ran. Bigfoot had found him 3 days into his flight. Hypothermic, dehydrated. Convinced the poachers would find him and finish what they had. Started with the ranger. Bigfoot had carried him to the sanctuary, had fed him, had protected him, had given him 9 months to decide if living hidden was better than dying exposed. Now Thomas wanted to testify, wanted to expose the network, wanted to stop the killing, even if it meant becoming a target again. But he needed protection from people who were not part of the corrupted system. He needed federal involvement from outside Alaska. He needed someone who could coordinate witness security without tipping off the officials who were already compromised. The woman in the cargo area added her story. Her name was Jennifer Krause, wildlife photographer. She had photographed poachers in the act of harvesting a protected wolverine, had her camera confiscated, had been told to forget what she saw or accidents happened. She had tried to report to Alaska state troopers. The officer who took her statement had called someone immediately after she left. That night her cabin had burned down. Investigators ruled it faulty wiring. Jennifer knew better. Bigfoot had found her trying to hike out through winter wilderness with nothing but the clothes she wore, and a day pack salvaged from the fire, had brought her to sanctuary, had kept her alive through months of -40 temperatures and isolation that would have broken most people. The third witness stayed silent. Young, maybe 25. Face carrying the kind of haunted expression that comes from seeing things that reshape your understanding of human capacity for violence. Sarah whispered that his name was Michael, that he had witnessed something worse than poaching, that he would only talk to federal prosecutors in a secure location because what he knew would dismantle the entire network if he survived long enough to testify. Behind us, the helicopter emerged from the valley, faster than my Cessna, more maneuverable, equipped with technology that could track us through weather and darkness. I had maybe a 20-minute head start before they closed the gap. 20 minutes to figure out how to land in Fairbanks with 3 witnesses and keep them alive long enough to reach people who were not compromised. Thomas spoke again. His voice carried weight that came from insider knowledge. He said the network had people at Fairbanks Airport, said landing there meant walking into a trap, said we needed to divert somewhere unexpected. Somewhere the network would not have advanced positioning. I ran through options while flying ridgelines that scraped my belly and tested my skill against terrain that killed pilots who made single mistakes. Every airport in interior Alaska was a known quantity. Every landing zone was predictable. Anywhere I set down would give the network time to position assets and eliminate witnesses before they could reach protective custody. Sarah suggested something that sounded insane. Land back at my private hangar. The one where Bigfoot had first made contact. The one that was isolated and unmonitored and off the grid. We could use my truck to transport witnesses to a secure location, could bypass airports entirely, could move through back roads where helicopter pursuit would be useless and ground assets would be scrambling to reposition. The plan had problems. My hangar was not secure. My truck could not outrun radio-coordinated vehicles. The network would eventually find us, but eventually was better than immediately. Eventually gave us time to make calls, to reach people outside Alaska, to arrange protection before the network closed the trap. I banked south toward Fairbanks, descended into lower airspace, where terrain clutter would make radar tracking difficult. The helicopter followed, maintaining distance, not trying to force us down, just keeping visual contact and waiting for us to land somewhere they could finish what they had started. That patience told me something important. They wanted all three witnesses dead, wanted it done in a way that looked like an accident or a pilot error, wanted no survivors who could contradict the official narrative. Shooting us down over wilderness would raise questions. Forcing a crash landing would be better. Waiting for us to land at my hangar and then moving in would be best. But they did not know about Bigfoot. Did not know that my hangar had become a meeting place for something that existed outside their understanding. Did not know that the beings they had just shot at in the sanctuary might have ways of communicating that did not depend on radios or phones. I checked my fuel, cutting it close. The extra weight of 3 passengers had increased consumption. I had maybe 45 minutes of flight time remaining. Enough to reach my hangar, not enough to divert anywhere else. Sarah asked about landing options, asked if I trusted anyone at Fairbanks Airport, asked if there were federal agents who could be contacted without alerting the network. Her questions assumed the system had good people embedded in the corruption, assumed that calling for help would reach someone clean instead of someone compromised. I told her I did not know. Told her that in 11 years of flying freight, I had learned to trust weather reports and fuel calculations, but never assumed I knew who was honest and who was paid to look away. Told her my plan was to land at my hangar and make calls to federal offices outside Alaska, FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Department of Justice, agencies that would not have local connections to the poaching network. Thomas made a sound in the cargo area. Not agreement, not disagreement, just the noise someone makes when they realize their survival depends on trusting people they have never met with information that could get them killed if it reaches wrong ears first. The helicopter stayed on our tail, patient, professional, letting us fly to wherever we thought safety waited, knowing that 3 witnesses in a small hangar were easier targets than 3 witnesses scattered across Alaska wilderness, knowing that eventually fuel would run out and landing would become mandatory and opportunities would present themselves. I crossed the last ridgeline before Fairbanks, saw the city spread below, lights beginning to show in the late afternoon darkness. Civilization that felt both close and impossibly distant. My hangar was 15 minutes northwest, isolated, vulnerable. The place where this had started with Bigfoot leaving a map and asking for trust. Now I was bringing that trust full circle. Bringing witnesses to the one place that felt like neutral ground. Hoping that Bigfoot's choice to involve me meant something beyond simple desperation. Hoping that beings who had saved 9 humans and protected them for months had plans that extended beyond my limited understanding. The helicopter dropped back as we approached Fairbanks airspace, not abandoning pursuit, just avoiding the attention that comes with unmarked aircraft following small planes to closely near populated areas. They knew where I was going, knew my hangar location, knew they could take their time positioning for whatever came next. I lined up my approach to the private airstrip, temperature dropping, perfect conditions for landing, and terrible conditions for survival if the network had assets already waiting on the ground. Sarah's hand gripped the armrest, knuckles white. She had survived 8 months in wilderness sanctuary, protected by beings that should not exist, had adapted to impossible circumstances, had built routines around staying hidden and staying alive. Now she was returning to the world that had failed to protect her, trusting a pilot she had met 2 hours ago, betting her life that federal protection would work this time when it had failed twice before. I touched down on frozen gravel, let the Cessna roll to a stop 50 yards from my hangar. The building looked exactly as I had left it that morning. Side door closed, no vehicles visible, no signs of disturbance. But absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. The network could have people inside, could have positioned assets hours ago based on tracking my departure flight path. The helicopter appeared over the southern ridge, distant but visible, holding pattern that kept us in sight while maintaining deniable distance, watching to see what we would do next, waiting for the moment when witnesses became targets in Alaska wilderness claimed. 3 more victims of accidents that investigators would rule tragic but unsuspicious. I killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy with possibilities that divided cleanly between survival and death, with no middle ground between them. Sarah looked at me with eyes that asked a question. Her voice did not speak. What happens now? What comes next? Did we just fly from one trap into another? I opened the cockpit door. Cold air flooded in, carrying the smell of aviation fuel and winter darkness, and underneath those familiar scents was something else. Old forest, wet earth, the wild smell that meant Bigfoot had been here recently, had been inside my hangar, had left something, or moved something, or prepared something, while I was flying to sanctuary and back. I climbed down from the plane, walked toward the hangar side door. My hand reached for the latch. Behind me, Sarah and the 3 witnesses waited beside the Cessna. Above us, the helicopter circled, patient, professional, certain that whatever happened next would end with witnesses silenced and network protected. I pushed the door open, reached for the light switch, and froze. The hangar was not empty. 7 Bigfoot stood inside my hangar. Not 1, not 3, 7. Different sizes, different fur colors, ranging from dark brown to reddish copper to gray. All standing in a loose circle around something positioned in the center of the concrete floor. All turning to look at me when the lights came on. All perfectly still. All waiting. The something in the center was a body. Human. Male. Late 40s maybe. Dressed in tactical gear. Face down. Not moving. A pool of blood spreading slowly from underneath the torso. Fresh. Maybe 10 minutes old. Maybe less. The largest Bigfoot, the one from my hangar encounters, stepped forward, made a low sound, gestured toward the body, then pointed outside where the helicopter still circled, then made a throat-cutting gesture that needed no translation. This person had come to kill. Bigfoot had stopped it, permanently. My mind processed implications faster than my body could react. The network had sent an advance team, had positioned someone inside my hangar to ambush us when we landed, had planned for witnesses to die in what would look like a confrontation with an intruder. Clean, explainable, tragic. But Bigfoot had been here first, had been watching my hangar, had intercepted the killer before we arrived, had eliminated the threat using methods that left no doubt about capability for violence when protection required it. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind me, saw the body, saw the 7 Bigfoot. Her intake of breath was sharp, but not surprised, not shocked. She had lived with Bigfoot for 8 months, had seen what they could do when sanctuary needed defending, had watched them stop poachers with force that was efficient and final. Thomas and the other 2 witnesses crowded into the doorway. Their reactions varied. Thomas nodded like this, confirmed something he already knew. Jennifer made a small sound of distress. Michael just stared with eyes that had already seen worse, and could not be shocked anymore by death delivered to people who dealt death professionally. The largest Bigfoot gestured again, more urgent this time, pointing outside, pointing at the helicopter, then making a circular motion with both hands. More coming, not just the helicopter. Ground assets, vehicles approaching. The network mobilizing everything available to contain 3 witnesses and eliminate the threat they represented. I had maybe 5 minutes before this hangar became a kill box. 5 minutes to decide if we ran or stayed. 5 minutes to trust that the plan I had set in motion during the flight back would work, or admit that I had led 3 people into a trap that Bigfoot strength alone could not break. During the flight, I had used my satellite phone, single text message to a number I had memorized but never called. FBI field office, Anchorage, not a local agent who might have network connections. The duty officer who handled after-hours emergency reports from remote locations. Message had been simple. 3 witnesses to wildlife trafficking and murder. Network corruption at state level. Need federal extraction. Coordinates attached. Time sensitive. The response had come back within 2 minutes. Units dispatching. ETA 45 minutes. Maintain position if safe. Evade if compromised. No local coordination. 45 minutes had sounded achievable when I sent the message. Now with ground assets approaching and a helicopter overhead and a body cooling on my hangar floor, 45 minutes felt like an eternity measured in heartbeats and shallow breathing. The Bigfoot spread out, taking positions near the hangar doors and windows. The reddish-furred female climbed into the rafters using strength and agility that made the ascent look effortless. 2 others moved outside into darkness, setting up perimeter defense, preparing for confrontation that was coming regardless of what I decided. Vehicle headlights appeared on the access road. 2 sets, maybe 3, coming fast. No sirens, no lights. Just a quiet approach of people who worked best in darkness and preferred witnesses who could not testify. Sarah moved to the workbench, started searching through drawers, found the flare gun I kept for emergencies, checked the load. 2 flares, enough to signal location if federal units needed help finding us in darkness. Enough to create distraction if escape became necessary. Not enough to stop armed professionals who came prepared for resistance. The vehicles stopped 300 yards out. Headlights killed. Doors opening and closing with careful quiet. Voices too low to distinguish words, but clear enough to count. 6 people minimum, maybe more. Spreading out to surround the hangar, taking positions that would create crossfire if we tried to run. Thomas spoke quietly from his position near the back wall. Told us this was standard network protocol. Surround, isolate, eliminate. Make it look like self-defense or accident. Have official reports filed before bodies were cold. He had seen it done twice. Had helped coordinate it once before. His conscience made him a liability. The largest Bigfoot moved to the main hangar door, stood directly in front of it, making a choice that was clear even without words. Nothing comes through this door without going through Bigfoot first. Network professionals with rifles and tactical training would have to face something they were not prepared for. Something that should not exist, but was about to demonstrate exactly how real it was. A voice called out from the darkness, offering negotiation that was obviously theater. Saying they knew witnesses were inside. Saying this could end peacefully. Saying surrender now and legal process would be followed. The lies were almost beautiful in their construction. Almost convincing if you did not know that legal process meant witnesses dying in custody from suicides that investigators would rule unfortunate but not suspicious. I checked my watch. 32 minutes since I sent the message. 13 minutes until federal units were supposed to arrive. Forever measured in seconds while armed professionals positioned for assault and Bigfoot prepared for defense that would reveal them to people who would not hesitate to kill what they could not explain. The helicopter descended, closer now. Spotlight piercing darkness, illuminating my hangar, showing my Cessna parked outside, showing the building that held witnesses and Bigfoot and a dead body that would require explanations nobody was prepared to give. The female Bigfoot in the rafters made a sound, sharp, warning. She had seen something the rest of us missed. Movement on the roof, someone climbing, positioning for overhead entry, preparing to breach from above, while ground team held attention at doors. 2 things happened simultaneously. The roof breach began with cutting torch visible through gaps in corrugated metal. And federal helicopter appeared from the south. Different sound, different profile. Marked, official. coming fast with spotlight sweeping terrain, an amplified voice demanding immediate cease of hostile action. The network vehicles scattered, headlights blazing to life, engines roaring. Retreat that was tactical, not panicked. Preserving assets, avoiding federal contact. Disappearing into darkness, while the person on my roof dropped his cutting torch and scrambled for extraction that was already leaving. The federal helicopter settled onto the gravel, 50 yards from my hangar. 4 agents emerged, body armor, federal markings, weapons ready but pointed safe. The lead agent approached with hands visible, calling out identification, asking for Marcus Webb, asking for witnesses, asking questions that meant the message had reached people who were not compromised. I stepped out of the hangar, identified myself, confirmed 3 witnesses inside. The agent nodded, started to move toward the door. I blocked his path, told him there were complications, told him there were others inside who had provided protection, told him those others needed to leave before official reports were filed because explaining them would create problems nobody wanted. The agent studied my face, reading truth and desperation and pleading all mixed together. He glanced at the hangar, at the door where Sarah stood visible, at darkness beyond where Bigfoot waited for permission to disappear before federal eyes made them official. The agent made a decision that was either the best choice of his career or the one that would end it. He told his team to secure the perimeter, told them to give him 5 minutes alone with the witnesses, told them nobody enters the hangar until he gave clearance. His team spread out, professional, efficient, not questioning orders that were slightly irregular, but not obviously wrong. The agent looked at me, gave a slight nod. 5 minutes. Handle whatever needs handling. Then we process this by the book, and those witnesses get protection that will actually work this time. I went back inside. The 7 Bigfoot were already moving, flowing toward the back door that opened to forest. The largest one stopped beside me, reached into fur along its chest, pulled out something small, placed it in my hand, a carved piece of wood, smooth, old, shaped into a symbol I did not recognize but felt the weight of. The same symbol as the antler carving, but larger, more detailed, more permanent. Bigfoot touched its chest, then touched mine, then pointed at the 3 witnesses, then at the forest. A promise, a connection, an understanding that what had started with a map drawn on birch bark had become something larger than rescue or protection. I was part of the network now, the human bridge between Bigfoot sanctuary and civilization, the person who could coordinate protection for both species when their interests aligned. The pilot who flew cargo and witnesses and hope between worlds that were supposed to remain separate, but kept intersecting in ways that required someone to navigate the space between. The Bigfoot disappeared into darkness. 7 beings that had defended my hangar and saved 3 lives melting into forest like they had never been there, leaving behind 1 body and questions I would have to answer carefully to maintain the fiction that witnesses had been protected by luck and federal timing, rather than intervention from beings that officially did not exist. The federal agent entered, saw the body. His face showed no surprise, just professional assessment. He called for his team, told them the hangar was secure, told them to process the scene as attempted homicide with the unknown defender who fled before federal arrival. Sarah and the 3 witnesses gave statements, detailed, precise, leaving out 7 Bigfoot, and including only the parts that fit official narratives. The network had sent a killer. Someone had stopped the killer. Federal arrival had prevented further violence. Clean, explainable, mostly true. The agent told me privately that witness protection was arranged. Safe houses outside Alaska. Federal prosecutors already assigned. Timeline for testimony would be months, but protection would last years, if necessary. The 3 witnesses would disappear into a system that had failed twice before, but promised to work this time because failures had been identified and removed. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Sarah and Thomas and Jennifer and Michael would survive long enough to testify. Wanted to think the Bigfoot's protection would extend beyond tonight because federal system would actually function as designed. But I also knew that networks adapt, that corruption finds new channels, that people who kill witnesses for profit do not stop because 3 escaped. They learn, they adjust, They find new ways to silence threats. 3 weeks later, I received confirmation. All 4 witnesses were alive. All 4 were secured in locations the network could not reach. All 4 were preparing testimony that would dismantle trafficking operations across Alaska. And I received something else, a package delivered to my hangar by person unknown. Inside was a piece of birch bark with a new map, 14 new locations, 14 new circles representing missing people who were not missing at all but living in sanctuary. Protected by beings that organized across distances I was only beginning to understand. The network was not just Alaska, not just 3 Bigfoot families. It was coordination across hundreds of miles. Communication without technology. The organization that had existed for decades, protecting humans who witnessed things that made them targets. I fly different routes now. Still cargo, still supplies to villages. But twice a month, I fly patterns that take me over terrain where sanctuary exists, where I drop supply packages marked with symbols only Bigfoot recognize, where I maintain connection between worlds that need each other more than either wants to admit. My brother David is still missing, still presumed dead 15 years after Denali swallowed him without trace. But I found something in my hangar last week, a carved piece of antler, different from the others, older, weathered, with initials scratched into the base that matched David's name. Bigfoot had found him, had tried to save him, had been too late, but had carried the evidence for 15 years waiting for someone who might understand what it meant, waiting for family who might want to know that David's final moments had not been alone, that something had tried, that wilderness sometimes offers mercy even when it cannot offer survival. I keep that carving on my dashboard. Reminder that some questions get answered in ways that create more questions. That trust given to impossible beings sometimes returns as truth about losses you thought would stay mysteries forever. So here is what I need you to understand. There are people living in Alaska wilderness right now who are not lost, who are protected by beings that choose mercy when humans choose violence, who survive because Bigfoot Network decided humans were worth saving, despite everything humans have done to deserve abandonment. And there are families who think their loved ones are dead, who could know truth if enough people decided truth mattered more than maintaining comfortable fictions about what exists in forests we pretend to understand. I made my choice. I trust Bigfoot. I protect sanctuary. I coordinate between worlds. I risk everything on the belief that intelligence and compassion are not uniquely human traits, and that sometimes the beings we fear are the ones offering rescue. Now you make yours. You know sanctuary exists. You know Bigfoot protects witnesses. You know corruption kills and official systems fail. Do you share this? Do you demand answers? Do you push for truth that would expose both network and Bigfoot to dangers neither might survive? Or do you let it stay quiet? Let sanctuary remain hidden. Let Bigfoot continue protecting without recognition or official acknowledgement. Let the rescued stay missing so they can stay alive. Tell me in the comments, because your answer determines what happens next. What I share, what I hide, what risks I take on behalf of beings who trusted a pilot with the biggest secret in Alaska. Choose carefully. Some truths save lives. Some truths end them. And you will not know which this is until the choice has already been made.